apposite tonight that we are actually having this discussion on the very day that a federal election has been called. And National Seniors, in our response to both the budget and the election announcement, have said, well, we feel as if older Australians have been passed by, they've been let down, because the very things that we wanted seem to be missed. There's been a bucket of promises for tax concessions, but there haven't been a lot of promises that have been given in terms of improving the lives of older Australians. But it was interesting to note today that there has been an announcement, and that announcement is, and I'll probably leave Peter to talk more about it in a minute, but there has been $500,000 of federal funds provided to the state government so that the very thing we're talking about tonight can be put out as a pilot. So cameras will be piloted in aged care facilities in South Australia, and we'll come to that a little bit later. I also want to say that the Royal Commission has given us an opportunity to think about some of the things that are happening in aged care, and the words that echo in my mind are from the Council, who, by the way, has just left. Dr McAvoy, who did the main hard yards in at the Royal Commission, actually said that he thought that in home care, he said that the way that it was operating at the moment was disrespectful, it was discriminatory, it was cruel, and it was unfair. Now, when you have a lead counsel in a Royal Commission saying that, it says something about the system. That's home care. Dementia will be the topic of the next round of the Royal Commission, and that'll take place in Sydney. And I've already suggested to anyone here tonight, and in fact, I spoke directly to someone here tonight about that, and I said there's still an opportunity to put in a submission to the Royal Commission. It is still not too late to do that. So if you've got concerns about dementia and the way that it's dealt with in residential care, put a submission in. My brother, who might come through the door a bit later, he actually put one in. So if you see a bloke that looks a bit like me, he was a geriatrician in South Australia. Is he he's turned up. Okay, there's Philip there. I'll give him a nod. But Phil was a geriatrician here in South Australia and was at the repatriation hospital and was worked in domiciliary care, and in his own life lost his wife, our dear beloved Lorena, and she couldn't get home care even though she had a brain tumour. Didn't get the care she needed. So there's a lot of issues that are out there at the moment, but look, I'll get out of your way, as Fred Dagg would say. I'll get out of your way in a minute here, because this is actually time to introduce our first speaker, and that's Peter Vincent. Now, Peter has been involved in the aged care sector for, and I'm never allowed to do maths on radio, but I'll try and do it now, and it's 25 years. 25 years, plus a little bit more. So we've got, all we can offer you is a quarter of a century of experience. He's held positions as Director of Nursing and Chief Executive Officer in both the not-for-profit and for-profit sectors. And he formed his own company 13 years ago. And he's obviously a good dad because he's got his kids all helping out tonight. So give them a nod. So that's fantastic. It's a family affair. And Peter was also called to give evidence to the Senate committee hearings into Indigenous health in remote health services, and he has been an independent expert witness to the Senate inquiry into the Oakden aged care service outcomes. And in a way, South Australia can both be proud and a bit disappointed that we are one of the reasons that so much focus is on aged care at the moment, and we've got some guests here tonight who'll be speaking a bit later about what we learned from Oakden. The most important thing to do is to learn from our mistakes and go forward in a better way. So Peter, I'll ask you now to kick off the proceedings.
I always worry when Ian gets to the microphone and starts talking about me. Thank you for coming, and also thank you to our panel for taking time out of your busy lives to join us here tonight. Aged Care Management Australia is my business. We specialise in aged care, and we've been here for a long time. What's driven my desire to have an event like this tonight, and I'm reminded that there are probably more people looking at it being live streamed than are here tonight, but at least you're here. My rationale for it, my reasons are that within our business, we go into aged care facilities across the country and we see the best of care and we see the worst of care and we see everything in between. CCTVs have been debated for a long time. They've been in nursing homes for ages, they're in the community, they're here in this building. So the challenges of asking that question, why can't we put them into residents' rooms where a great deal of care occurs, is a discussion that we need to have. The other elements of that, and we're running 2 more sessions, one on the 12th of May and the 13th of May, one on the 12th of June, where we're going to look at staffing and we're going to look at issues around quality. Now, those 3 issues, the issues of surveillance, the issues of having quality staff, and how we're measuring the services that we're delivering, are the key learning outcomes that we took from the Oakden scenario. I don't want to dwell on Oakden, I want to move on from Oakden, and I know Stuart and I know Nolene and everybody else here want to move on as well. So what we're trying to do is have this discussion around the barriers to having CCTV in residents' rooms. I applaud the Minister today for making the announcement that the state government, supported by the federal government, are putting in, is it $500,000, Steve? To support a trial with a system presented by Care Protect. And hopefully that trial will demonstrate that we can use it effectively. Now, as I said, you want to just move on a bit, mate? That's right. My son driving the train behind me. What we want to do is, as I said, the drivers for this came from Oakden originally, but we need to move on from that. And we want South Australia to be recognised as a centre of excellence for innovation in this area, not to be known as the train wreck that was Oakden. In a couple of seconds, I'm going to ask Nolene and then Stuart to come up and tell their stories about what happened to their families, their loved ones, in residential aged care. Nolene's story is not about Oakden, it's about a separate scenario. And she had the courage to put CCTV or a remote camera into her father's room because proprietaries weren't listening to the concerns that she was raising and the evidence that she had that something wasn't right. Stuart's story is far more prolonged than that, I think, and I think it goes without saying that a fair amount of impetus to the decisions that were made by the state government today have been lobbied long and hard by Stuart, very effectively, and also the Honourable Frank Pangello, with his bill before Parliament at the moment, have set the way that we can move this forward. So, as I said, in our business we see what is happening. We know that there are issues that need to be addressed. It's not always about residents. We also see staff that are being abused with aggressive residents. We see staff that are being hit, kicked, punched, whatever. And if we can capture that and protect the staff as well as protect the residents, then my belief is that we've done a good thing. So what I'd like to do is ask Nolene to come up and tell her story. And at the same time, we're going to show a video, 2 videos, of the care that her father received while he was in care.
Just before we do, I just want to say that Nolene Hausler was on the ABC when this first broke, and for those people that are watching on live streaming that don't know that, I believe that video is still available, isn't it? You can still see it. And also, Nolene has been consistent, and I know that it takes a big toll, because you were there today on the radio, you were there again. You've been down at the Royal Commission, and is tireless campaigner. So please put your hands together and thank Nolene.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to be here tonight, and thank you for those that have organised. I'm here to speak on behalf of our father, Clary Häusler, My 3.5 years of advocacy is for optional CCTV in the residential care area, and in particular in respect of those without a voice and legal capacity who mirror the very vulnerable situation that my father lived and experienced over that time. Briefly, Dad lived in the same care facility for 15 years in Adelaide, and that was until his passing in January 2017. In the early years, when Dad was ambulant and interactive, compassionate and dedicated staff provided exceptional high standards of care and with dignity and respect. In 2014, his home of 12 years by that time was acquired by a corporate provider. The cost-cutting, reduced staff numbers and minimal experience and scope of practice to provide the care quickly emerged during that time, adding issue to meeting Dad's holistic and daily needs. By 2015, he was aged 89 and he was experiencing the end-stage dementia. He was non-verbal, mentally and physically incapable, requiring 24/7 assistance with all his needs as a very vulnerable human being. Concerns of unexplained bruising, incontinence care, dehydration, wound care, weight loss, these were all reported via the channels of complaint and command and were met with no resolve. Dad continued to deteriorate and became fearful, withdrawn and incapable of any communication. By September, I had grave concerns for our father's safety. I named one of the staff members of concern to management and requested the permission to install a camera in Dad's protection in the vulnerable state of his decline. Management actually defended the staff member and their robust systems, denied the camera and dismissed other issues and said that it was reflective of Dad's progressive dementia, so they really weren't interested. The provider failed in their duty of care towards our father and chose a risk aversion over their accountability. Responsible for father's protection and well-being, I installed a covert camera in his bedroom. The visual footage you are witnessing is of our father and in part reveals footage showing Dad's charter of rights were completely eroded. Left isolated and alone, staff ate his food, failed to speak to him, used excessive force, left drinks and bells out of reach, and showed no dignity or respect when attending to his needs. Proof that the accreditation, police checks, elder abuse training, dementia awareness and staff education holds no guarantee that quality care will be delivered to the vulnerable in their private rooms. The frail are silenced, invisible, and with no vigilance or supervision become the soft targets of neglect. On September the 9th, Dad was criminally assaulted whilst being fed his lunch by the named experienced staff member of 5 years, Corey Lucas. The assault was deliberate and calculated. CIB detectives who saw the footage identified escalating behaviour of abuse, meaning that Lucas had done this or similar before. Dad had no means to raise an alarm. He was defenceless and all Dad could do was endure the 25 minutes of assault. Without the camera, Lucas would have continued as a perpetrator to abuse. The footage, admissible in court, convicted Lucas of 9 counts of aggravated assault. He served 3 weeks in jail of a 10-month reduced sentence because of prison overcrowding. Staff actually choose their behaviour in private rooms, providers are accountable, and cameras will protect our vulnerable. Whilst Dad's horrendous abuse and my actions to protect him expose serious issues, it's time to change the narrative and focus on prevention and protection model of care for our loved ones. The current accreditation and complaints resolution process is time-consuming and restricted in its jurisdiction to ensure safe, dignified care. Decision makers of today need to take a moment to imagine themselves as my father in the footage and consider what would they want as far as protection when they become this vulnerable. The visual voice provided by ethical surveillance promotes best practice, giving reassurance to the resident. If concerns arise, a real collaborative focus and resolution is essential. In closing, the legislative reform in honour of our father Clary's Law will provide the rights of residents or their legal advocate the choice of cameras in their rooms. We deem the private room their home. We speak with verbatim of resident-directed care and their right to civil liberties, not pursuant to or restricted by legal capacity, age or health. We all live in the world of CCTV. We choose to install cameras in our own homes for our protection and safety. Police, the judicial system, media are constantly seeking visual evidence for proof of fact or action. It's time we extend the privilege to our care and those that we have in care. With that said, how can we deny the vulnerable residents the right to choose CCTV as an integral part of solving the current concerns in aged care that we have today? Thank you kindly for the opportunity to speak on behalf of those without a voice.
Thank you very much, Nolene, and I know it's harrowing to see that, and it's very, very powerful. And it shows you why people want to see CCTV cameras in aged care, because you can then see what's going on. Now, our next speaker, Stuart Johnson, has been a tireless advocate, and Stuart, I suppose in a way, it was through your advocacy that the Royal Commission has actually been kicked along. I mean, there's been Four Corners, there's been a lot of other people involved, but you've always been out there, so I'd now like you to come to the stand and tell us your story. And I know it's hard every time you do it, but thank you very much.
Speech that I've rewritten 5 times, I think I've lost. But I'd just like to acknowledge Nolene. That was fantastic. I know how hard it is. I know there's a few family members of Oakton relatives, but more importantly, I think just anyone who's watching worldwide has probably either been affected directly or indirectly by abuse. They could even be staff members who are damn good at their job and just aren't respected. It is a workplace, and we mustn't forget that. That was the front page of the Advertiser nearly 2 years ago. My mum was in Oakton in 2008, so nearly 11 years ago. She was a chronic pain sufferer. She's a beautiful lady. I was very fortunate growing up. We never knew abuse in our home. I never heard my parents raise their voices to one another, ever. And I realise I'm very fortunate. Mum was suffering chronic pain. She'd been a breast cancer survivor. She had fibromyalgia, Paget's disease, chronic rheumatoid arthritis, osteoporosis. She had a full hip replacement, and she was at the end of her line. We were under the care of a professor at the Royal Adelaide Pain Clinic who was actually shedding tears with us as a family the week before we made the radical decision to try electroconvulsive therapy, which had been trialled overseas and had been found to be effective in closing the pain gate in people with chronic pain. So essentially we were going to zap her with 35,000 volts, and she was keen as mustard for it, because only the week before that she had attempted to take her own life because she had enough. My dad sat 24/7 with my mum in chronic pain. She slept an hour a day. She was opiate tolerant. No amount of morphine would ever take the pain away. When she broke her hip, it took 4 ambulances, and they actually had to give her a horse tranquilizer to get her out of the house so she didn't feel the pain. So we were desperate, and the only place that she could have this done under the care of an aged care mental health was Oakton. So as a family, we took Mum to Oakton on that fateful day in July. Her grandkids at the time accompanied her. And we had no experience as to what we were looking for. Oakton looked fine. And we dropped her off there on the Monday, and I was working each day, and I called in each night diligently to see how she was going. She was due to start the treatment Thursday. And on the second night, I went there after work, and she looked at me And she said, can we go outside? She was in a wheelchair, so I wheeled her outside. And I could see within her eyes something had changed. And I think you see somebody's soul, obviously, through their eyes, but you also see fear. And I'd never seen that look in her eye before. And I said to her, what's wrong? And she dissolved in tears and started off with a conversation with Stuart. You mustn't say anything because I need this treatment. But a carer last night, I needed to go to the toilet, which was a 2-person lift. She rang the bell for about 45 minutes and was eventually answered by this burly night carer who proceeded to pick her up and throw her into the wheelchair, wheeled her at a high rate of knots to the toilet, dropped her from a great height onto the toilet, and about turned and left. Now, with fibromyalgia, if you touch somebody like that, it hurts. This is the middle of winter. So she proceeded to tell me that after nearly 50 minutes of ringing the bell, the door flings open, and this gentleman, I won't call him a gentleman, this person walked up to her, grabbed her by the face, punched her, slapped her, grabbed her by the chin, and went nose to nose with her and told her she is nothing effing special and she will sit there and wait. He about turned the light out and left her for another hour. He then finally returned, picked her up again, threw her in the wheelchair, ran over her feet, threw her back into bed, told her she was a scoundrel, slammed the door and left her. That gives you an idea of, as a son, it was devastating. But it showed also the fact that she was so desperate for the treatment that she actually precursored this conversation with, please don't cause a fuss. Well, I did cause a fuss. And I was assured, we were all assured as a family, that this was a first-class facility, such as we've now found out, was the ability within the Oakden framework at that site to bend the truth. We got Mum out of there quick smart. I went to the police, and the police couldn't do anything because it was her word against his, because it was a husband and wife carer on night shift together, and that was it. So the prospect of a conviction was nil, as is the case with most. It was suggested to me that Mum was picked on because, like everyone else in the facility, they were suffering advanced stages of dementia. But this guy didn't realise that Mum didn't have dementia. She hadn't started her treatment. She had a sharp mind. To cut a long story short, we were so embroiled with caring for Mum, we got her out of there, she had her treatment, and the electric shock treatment actually erased a bit of her memory of Oakden, which I'm grateful for. It wasn't so good for my dad, who probably died about 10 years earlier than he should have through the devastation that his wife had been treated like that. Fast forward to 2017, my mum died in 2014. I gave up my career in 2010 to care for both my parents. Even going to a hospital invoked fear in us, not for what was wrong, but for having to leave a loved one in care overnight. Mum passed in 2014. Along came a huge bout of grief, which actually resulted in me developing, believe it or not, a social phobia. I hadn't been out of the house 6 months prior to that. My first foray into knowing about Oakden was a Facebook post from the Advertiser saying that the Oakden report, the Groves report, had been released. I read the first paragraph of that and realising that I'd been lied to, I'd been fobbed off 11 years later. I'm sitting there already in absolute desperation and grief. It was either going to make me or break me. The hundreds of people who suffered after my mum, it could have been avoided. And that was a guilt that I felt in a large way. So I made that conscious decision to just write a simple comment that this happened to my mum. That was then followed by, as we've all probably colloquially become known as, the Oakden families coming forward one by one. I had my first call from the Advertiser that night asking if they could do a story. I said, no way, we're a very private family. But then the grief and the and the need to do something just overrode my initial feelings, and I agreed. And a day later, I went to the shop for the first time in 6 months to get the paper, and that was the front page. That then gave a fire in me to make a difference, to give people a voice who didn't have a voice. It was too late for my mum. It's been too late for many of the Oakton family's parents. But in our loved ones' memories, it's what we do for the future. We're all going to get old. It's taken us to Canberra. It's taken us to every level of politics. It's made us household names. It's made me particularly the focus of a nation at one stage, for every poor family around the nation contacting me as a focal point to share their stories. I sat and listened to literally hundreds of families who had nowhere else to go, had felt the system had let them down, or who just needed an ear they never had. I physically vomited with them. I cried, but I became more determined. I played politics. I engaged with everyone that I thought could get us to the stage where we had unannounced visits. We had a one single focal point for people to go to and be believed. That we had an understanding that we need to value, we need to respect our elders. We need to get that back in our nation as a base in order to build. And that's what sadly has been lacking in this country for decades. Advocates for decades have been saying what we have been saying and have never been listened to. The fact that we have royal commissions, one just finishing aged care and disability, that covers from birth to death because of the mistreatment of people in this country, is a shame, and we have got to change it. I'll go even further now. Today's announcement of CCTV pilot in South Australia is a culmination of me searching the world for a safeguarding system that wasn't going to give more power to the people doing wrong, that would protect the good in the staff, would highlight the need for more staff, but more importantly, quality staff. Oakton had an abundance of staff. They had a rotten culture. The amount of staff absolutely is critical, but the quality is just as important. CCTV is around us everywhere. As we all know, if you have a Flybuys card and you scan it, you're tracked. We are oblivious to what Google knows about us, to what everyone knows about us. And yet the conversation in this country, even at the onset of the Oakton exposure, but as we've gone through and realised Oakton was the tip of the iceberg, and Oaktons are everywhere, we have still had a pocket of people who believe CCTV is spying on people. I agree. That was why we had to find a safeguarding system that protected the rights and the privacy and the dignity of people. And I found that technology in the UK, and it's called Care Protect. Everyone has wanted to jump on and say, we've got this, Stuart, can you tell us, can you show people how great we are? And a lot of them have been rubbish. So I spent 6 months tearing the Care Protect system apart to guarantee within myself that I wasn't recommending a spy camera, that I wasn't setting up our vulnerable for another fall. This system is good. I went back, luckily, to my mum's hometown and met with her only surviving brother, who's now 89. My son and I went back 8 weeks ago. He found out about Oakton when I appeared on the BBC News. We hadn't told him. I went back to update him on what happened to his little sister. But more importantly, I was also followed by journalists from the BBC and overseas who were extremely interested in how we're progressing in Australia. I visited the Care Protect headquarters in Belfast, and there I met an incredible group of people, all industry recognised and trained reviewers. I had a look at their security setups. If somebody falls out of bed in an Australian nursing home with Care Protect installed, within 4 seconds, that camera goes live. Within 30 seconds, that facility is notified. No other family should ever have questions unanswered about what happened to a loved one. No staff member should be falsely accused of things they haven't done by the very people, mostly other staff, who are actually the bad apples. The good staff deserve this. The loved ones deserve this. The families deserve this. And I applaud Premier Marshall and Minister Wade. This is a bipartisan, innovative, cutting-edge initiative that will see South Australia create the new chapter on our terms. And I thank each and every one of you for attending and for keeping that conversation going. Just remember, if anybody says to you, you lose dignity with a camera, we lost so much more than dignity, and thousands of others are losing that daily, and we can't stand and allow that to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. As Stuart mentioned, some of the benefits that he's seen in the Care Protect system. I've been fortunate enough with Frank Pangello and Stephen Wade and others. I think quite a number of people have seen the demonstration by Care Protect, but I think it's important for us to know what it's about. So the next speaker tonight will be Scott Sterling from Care Protect, and he can show us some more about this. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present tonight. Thanks, Peter, for the invite. It's obviously been a very interesting day for us with the announcement of the pilot with SA Health, which we're very much looking forward to, and also St Basil's Aged Care, which we signed this afternoon. Just to give you a little bit of background on the firm itself, it was established in 2015. There's 5 directors at the moment. 4 of those are in the UK, and I run our operations out of Sydney currently. Our managing director, Philip Scott, he's been a registered nurse for over 30 years. He's also held CEO-level positions at 2 of the UK's largest mental health and aged care businesses. We also operate 4 of our own care homes in the UK, in which this product was tried and tested for around 18 months before we actually came to the market. Bramley Court in Birmingham is one of those care homes. Just some facts and figures. After 6 months of installing the actual system, we saw a 24% reduction on average in safeguarding incidents. Hospital admissions were reduced by 18% in 6 months again. Falls were being detected and remedial action was being put in place to avoid reoccurrence. Medication rounds, errors were reduced on average by 34% in 6 months, and unexplained injuries were totally eradicated because we had actual visual evidence to prove what was happening. What do we actually do? So we install smart technology camera systems in aged care facilities and also mental health wards in the UK. 2 sides of that. There's cameras installed in communal areas. They record on a 24/7 basis, and we also install cameras in bedroom settings. The cameras in a bedroom will only ever be switched on when there's consent given by a resident or a next of kin. Those cameras actually remain dormant in the bedrooms until they're triggered by a certain event. So that will be a change in sound, movement, or light. Any audio, any visual that is recorded is immediately streamed off-site, so it's independent from the facility. It's stored in a secure cloud server. We use Amazon Web Services at the moment, which is a military-grade cloud server. It's then downloaded directly into our hub, our secure hub. We employ a team of independent healthcare professionals They're independent of the facility. They work for Care Protect. They're led by a woman called Joan Mulholland. She's our Director of Practice and Quality. She's been a state-registered nurse, state-registered mental health nurse in the United Kingdom for 30, 40 years as well. She's been an associate professor in Exeter University and a course director for developing practice in healthcare. She's also SIA approved for the management of services. Anyone we employ in our secure hub, which is actually located in Belfast in Northern Ireland currently, is registered with the Security Industry Authority. That gives them a license to view CCTV and also act as an independent witness in the event that a criminal case comes to light. We have a monitor and reviewing team. There's currently about 40 people work for us on the review and monitoring team. They will either be registered nurses or social workers in the United Kingdom. Again, everyone's SIA licensed, giving them the right to view CCTV, and they will carry out constant review of care settings. They'll provide daily, weekly, and monthly feedback to senior management teams in the form of facility managers. Why do people come to us? Typical diagnostic findings: facilities are experiencing poor quality issues. Unexplained injuries are being brought to light by family members. Complaints that remain persistent, and the facility can be sanctioned by a regulator in a bad event. Customer service issues: we've seen false risks not being identified correctly. We saw that in our own homes when we installed the system. Medication rounds, again, not being completed correctly. Residents are admitted to hospital due to poor hydration. We had a lot of that in our own homes because residents weren't being hydrated correctly. We were able to watch, and our cameras were picking up through sensors, which I'll show you in a second, when people were being hydrated, and that's how we were able to eliminate hospital admissions. What do we provide then? So our solution was to bring this system to the market after it was trialed and tested. We install the entire system in a facility, whether that be aged care or mental health. There's no upfront cost to the provider at all. We pay for the equipment, we install the equipment, and we carry out a commissioning process with the staff, the residents, and the families of the facility, and any other stakeholders that we are requested to do so. We then set up an alert system. For example, it's always on a 24/7 basis. Our hub operates 24/7 with the nurses and social workers that are in there. We set up alert services. For example, if there's a fall out of bed during the middle of the night, as Stuart mentioned earlier, we detect that within 4 seconds. We get an alert to our secure hub in Belfast. It's reviewed by an independent healthcare professional that we employ, and within 30 seconds of that event occurring, we will have contacted the ward directly if it's a severe event. We also carry out 2 hours of random sampling every single day for each one of our clients. So that could be across a range of things. That would be a dining experience, a bathing, changing experience in a bedroom. That will be compiled into a monthly report and handed to a facility manager at the end of the month as a sort of staff training tool. Just on that note, we also report on good practice in that report. It's not all negative. We personally have found that in our own homes, the good practice, when we have reported on it, we've pinned that up on the notice board as a morale boost for our staff, because as you know, there's many, many good carers out there. The charge, I don't know if you can actually see it on that, our charge is $20 per week per registered bed plus GST. And that's the first time. Once the commissioning is carried out, we bill that on a monthly basis per bed number. Setting up a trigger. So these are the motion windows I'm talking about. This would be a typical aged care bedroom, as you know. We would set up motion windows around the bed, for example. We can have as many of those as you want. They can be any shape or size, and they will detect, once interrupted, a fall, for example, and the alert will then hit our hub in Belfast and be reviewed. A lot of our clients would ask us to put them on door handles as well to check that medication rounds are being completed correctly, and we can review that footage and report on that. Redaction capability was a huge thing for us when we were growing this business. People want to have their privacy and dignity, and it was very important that we did that. We've included a redaction window feature, for example. If someone is using a bedside commode, we will have the motion window around the commode in case, if the resident was to fall off while using it, but we can't actually see in behind that, and that will always remain there. The resident can request that to the facility, and we'll work with the facility to put that in place. It can be moved under a request from the resident or family. Secure dashboard. So this is the dashboard that we'll use in our hub in Belfast. Everyone will have a login that works for us, very secure. As I said, all the data is encrypted off-site, and it will be downloaded into our hub. We offer live view services, which has been a huge part of our business across the UK for the mental health space. We have this hub in Belfast that's dedicated to live view services. These guys will be watching on a 24/7 live basis acutely ill patients if they're admitted and they're very vulnerable and looking to self-harm. So we'll keep an eye on those guys 24/7. The ward, we actually supply the ward with Care Protect smartphones as well as part of the package, the $20 per week. We supply them phones and also visual monitors so they can see what we're seeing on a live view basis, but we're there as a third eye in the event that they're rushed off their feet, which they usually are. Secure data storage, as I mentioned, our cameras are hardwired to a dedicated connection that we set up on site. It's completely segregated from our client's internal network, so there's no way that that data can be tinkered with or tailored with in any way. Cat6 cabling, as I mentioned. Wi-Fi, we've been asked for Wi-Fi occasionally by our clients, but it's much, much safer to have hardwired for us. We use Amazon Web Services, leading cloud hosting provider, military grade, and our data stored using the advanced encryption standard 256. We can retain the data for up to 90 days. If there's a severe event or there's any sort of inquiry, either civil or criminal, we'll keep that data indefinitely. 1080p uploads for fast upload and review time into the hub. No compromise on image or video quality. If the connectivity is somehow lost, we do have a memory card built into the cameras which can record on a temporary basis. We also have an app, as we're all 2019, everybody has one now, a smartphone. Families can download that app onto their smartphones and they can request a code from the facility directly to view the bedroom camera that their relative is in. We give them a 3-minute window in every 2-hour period. We actually feel that any more may be an invasion of privacy. So we're keen to have feedback on that because no one in the UK actually uses it out of all our client base. I think it might be more appealing in Australia, so we're keen to hear feedback. Use of CCTV in South Australia. We work with DLA Piper Australia out here. We find that all the opinions we have for each state, mainly South Australia, obviously with a focus here, as long as consent's given by the resident or a next of kin, there's no issue with installing that camera in a bedroom and turning it on. If we do not have consent from a resident, we will cover that camera completely. We'll put a sticker on it so there's no chance that can be switched on. DLA Piper have also recommended that we tell staff members before we plan to actually record. As part of our service and inclusive of the fee, we provide all marketing material for our clients' sites. We also provide all CCTV stickers, wall signage, etc. So people know where they're being recorded and where they're not. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was extraordinary. It's the second time I've seen it, and I still sort of pinch myself and think what a world I've grown up in, because I went to my cousin's 70th birthday the other day, and he's one of the henchkies from up in Eden Valley, and he said how when he grew up they didn't even have a fridge, and he used to listen to shortwave radio. You know, and now we've got to the point where you have an app that you can, wherever you are in the world, I imagine you can watch in and get your 3 minutes every couple of hours, or whatever, which I think very interesting to follow that up tonight and see whether people do think that's an invasion of privacy or bringing people together. I'd just like to now introduce sort of formally our guests, and we'll do that as we go through and have the question and answer. I'm doing a sort of Tony Jones here, slightly different style, but we've got more than he would ever put on a panel, but the quality is also far better than... we've got Stephen Wade, Minister for Health and Wellbeing, Mark Parnell sitting next to him there with the bad hair day, Mark said. I thought he came on a cycle today, but he didn't, because he's a great cyclist. And Green spokesperson on ageing, Frank Pangello, star of stage and screen, radio and print, and now in the upper house, an old colleague of mine from TV days, Frank Pangello from SA Best, Luke Westerberg from AXA, and Chris Picton, opposition spokesperson as well. And we've also got some extraordinary guests that have come in from, Wayne Belcher's come in from Western Australia. Wayne, thank you very much. You've flown in. And Wayne's had an experience with hidden cameras 20 years ago, and I know Frank's used them in TV. But I think we would actually like to hear, first of all, if you don't mind, from Wayne. Wayne Belcher, I am CEO of Care Western Australia, because, Wayne, this is not something new to you. It's new to us, but it's not new to you. Would you be able to just tell us your brief story about that?
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Just bring the microphone. You have to pick it up and hold it probably, yeah.
Thanks for the invitation. It's lovely to be here. You know, they say if you go far enough east, you'll catch up with the wise men from the west.
Just bring the mic a little bit closer.
Perth's about as far east from Adelaide, I think, as you can go, the other way around. So I was then CEO of another organisation, a large residential and community care organisation in Perth. It was 21 years ago, April, so very timely in terms of anniversary. I was a young CEO. I'd been in the job for maybe 5.5 years. It was my first CEO role. And I got a surprise call one day to come down and go down and visit one of my site managers about an hour and a half from Perth. Had a chat with her, and she was presented with a family who lived 3 hours north of Perth. All of the family were farmers. Their mother was in care in this facility, then a low care facility. So if you remember those days of hostels, we used to call them. And they had talked to this manager about this unexplained bruising on their mum's arms, shoulders, and sometimes on her face. And I think that was the moment when my heart sank. But I knew that we had to exclude any other clinical reason that might have been part of that presentation. This lady was almost completely blind, very dependent on staff, and you know, sometimes manual handling of people, when you're actually even helping them, the skin integrity and whatever, you can get bruising from those things. So we needed to be careful, but I think even that early I had this inkling that something wasn't right. So with the family's permission, we had some further blood tests taken of this dear lady, and they all came back negative. So I simply said to the manager, this is probably the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done in my life, but I was going to contact our lawyers to work out the process of getting video surveillance installed.
Can I just ask you, when you did that with the, well, for want of a better word, the victim's permission?
Yes, both from the resident herself and from her family, who were quite desperate. I mean, they were farmers at seeding time, April, May, you know, all of those sorts of things. It's difficult. So families rely on us to do the right thing. That's simply it, to do the right thing. Do good things and do right things, do things right. So we basically had a script prepared from our legal counsel. We informed the staff. We worked through the issues of...
So you informed the staff?
We informed the staff and said that video.
It's not really a hidden camera then if you've informed the staff.
Oh, well,
is
we
it?
didn't say where the camera was, but we said to the staff that that a particular resident had been. We were suspicious there had been some physical assault, and we were going to be placing a camera in the room. Now, this is 21 years ago. This is not high technology. This is a camera that couldn't fit into the face of a clock. This had to fit up in the light panel, and it was hardwired back to a VHS recorder. Remember those things? I mean, it was hard work, but it had to be done because we could not work out what was happening. And I say to the CEOs and the stories I've heard is just grow some. You've got to do the right thing. We are engaged not because we should be looking at our paycheck. We're engaged to care for vulnerable people. You need to do what you need to do. It took 6 months. 6 months. Now, we didn't look at every day's video, and I suspect that Scott, you've got your surveillance 24 hours a day, but you wouldn't have staff in the facility wanting to look at last night's CCTV records. No, you use that as a check when something happens.
So after 6 months, cut
6
to the
months,
chase, what
6
happened?
months, the person reverted to form.
Because
they
the person
reverted to form.
habituated, they forgot the camera was there. and
We
then
are
they-
what we are, and the person reverted to form. It was a male carer on at night, and he had slapped this woman, this resident, and you could hear her voice coming through the video, as grainy as it was, but we then subsequently immediately dismissed the person. It's the first time then the Miscellaneous Workers Union that was pretty active. I think it was the first time I've seen them completely disown a member. They walked out of the meeting, the person was dismissed. We took the video to the police and with a report and let them do their work. Would I ever do it again? So, first one, have I done it again? Yes. Would I ever not choose to do it? I don't think so. If I'm presented with enough concern to do that, I mean, sometimes it's theft of things. It doesn't have to be physical assault, it can be theft. That's sometimes a balance in care for people with dementia, because theft sometimes is just borrowing things and putting them elsewhere and whatever. But when the concern is there, we need to respond to the expressed concern of families,
Well,
residents, whatever.
Thank you for telling us that, Wayne. And I find the story interesting because they say when you're doing wildlife photography that you actually have to let the animals get used to the hide until they finally revert to their normal behaviour. It took 6 months for this creature to revert to their bad behaviour. I then think it's probably best now to bring in Minister Stephen Wade, because this announcement today is going to give a lot of people hope. And you've heard that 20 years ago, the answer was sort of there. Stephen Wade, do you believe that this is going to be an answer to some of your problems in terms of you are ultimately in charge of, what is it, 41?
45.
45, I thought it was 41. So it's 45 aged care homes in South Australia, and the buck stops right there, doesn't it? So it gives you a pretty strong focus to make sure that if you've got a tool that you can use to improve safety and quality, you'll use it. Is that why you've done it?
Well, certainly the state government is the lead provider of residential aged care in South Australia. We don't have any facilities currently for older South Australians in the metropolitan area, but as you say, we've got 45 facilities in country South Australia, more than 1,400 residents in our care. And I'm glad you used the word "some of the problems," because I think we shouldn't mislead ourselves to think that this sort of technology will deal with all of the issues. But I think it's very interesting, partly in terms of the surveillance, the opportunity to observe both good care and bad care, but also the alerts. The point that Scott was making about a motion alert that might be installed to protect a resident who's at risk of falling. A motion alert might be focused on a potential site for self-harm, particularly in a mental health facility. If you can alert to staff that a resident might be approaching a ligature point, that may well be a life-saving intervention. And the other point that Scott made was that the range, it's not all optical. It might be that Considering Care Protect doesn't use surveillance in bathrooms. You might have a Scott will correct me on the technology, but I think it's a thermal imaging capacity to alert the system if somebody's in distress in a bathroom. And also the rehydration. I can remember being at a forum recently at one of the North Adelaide facilities where people were talking about the concern about rehydration. If we can have a way of, if you like, backing up staff, because we all forget, have I reminded the resident to be rehydrated, to have technology backing up the staff to make sure we maintain quality care. I think there's exciting opportunities that could be explored. Now, we're not going to explore all of those possibilities in the pilot this year. What the federal government and the state government are partnering on with Care Protect as our technology partner will be focused on the optical surveillance, not the rehydration alerts and the like. But it's an exciting opportunity to make sure that we're delivering quality care, provide safeguards for the residents and also peace of mind for their families.
One of the things I want to actually explore now is the bipartisan, tripartisan, all-partisan nature, whatever you want to call it, of this multi-partisan. Thank you, Mark. That's multi-partisan nature of this, because I think aged care, and I think everybody in this room thinks aged care should be above party politics. I did actually hear Bill Shorten say aged care has to be above party politics. This was at an event in Melbourne. I think it's important that we actually remember that. He also had this incredible line. He said, aged care's got more pilots running at the moment than the Australian Air Force. It's a good line, I thought. But I want to know, when we hear a pilot, is it an excuse for a government or for us to say, well, we'll give it a try and then it sort of will go away? I want to know what your view of this pilot is, and then I'd like to go to the Labor Party, the Greens and the other parties here and say, look, what do they expect from the pilot? You're flying the plane, you've got the pilot, yeah.
Yeah, I don't apologise for a pilot, because the simplest way to do nothing would have been to do nothing. I've actually gone out and engaged the Commonwealth, sought the resources and secured the resources. It's great to have a technology partner like Care Protect, because many of the issues that came to mind for me when I was thinking about optical surveillance and CCTV, Care Protect and the British aged care industry has already been working through.
So do we need a pilot?
Beg your pardon?
Do we need a pilot then? I mean, it's a bit like saying, look, Penicillin works in England, will it work here?
Well, every jurisdiction's different, and not only our legislative framework. They've got a unitary system, so the same government, the same network of governments that are running the services are the same network. It's also the regulator. We have, in the South Australian context, we've got two pieces of legislation: a surveillance devices legislation, which is state legislation. Almost all of the aged care regulation is by the Commonwealth government, and so we've got a different regulatory environment. We've also got a different culture. I think Scott's question to us about the Brits are not using the app, would we? My hunch is that we would. So let's see how the technology is used differently, what our expectations are in terms of, we've got different workforces, we've got different unions, there's the state government. All of our aged care facilities are run by Country Health SA. We've got policies and procedures at the moment that are focused in relation to surveillance that focus on respecting the rights of staff, and they need to be respected. But the balance, I believe, needs to be refocused on our primary responsibility to provide for the safety care and privacy of our residents. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And,
all right, well, let's quickly see if we can get a response there from Chris Picton, because your opposition spokesperson, and I imagine you'll be dealing with the Health Services Union and others will be saying, look what's going on here and this is Big Brother or whatever. Or is it not like that? Is it completely accepted that this works in England and your members from various unions will actually say, well, let's give it a go? What's the reaction you're getting?
Well, thank you very much, Ian, and thanks for having us here. I mean, from our perspective, this is a trial that we're supporting. We think it's a good path to go down. I'm not going to bag the government for doing a trial. I think that actually, given the amount of issues that need to be explored in this, a trial is appropriate to do that for a year. At the outset, I'd like to particularly thank family members, advocates, particularly obviously Nolene and Stuart who are here, but also the many others who have been pushing for this. I'll do something rare and say something nice about another politician. I'll say something nice about Frank as well, who's, since the day he got into Parliament, has been pushing for this as well. So has been a tireless advocate as well. But I think a trial is appropriate, and I think particularly when you look at, already we've outlined some of the questions about how this is going to work in terms of families being able to look at it for 3 minutes out of 2 hours, and is that the right balance, and is that what families would want? I think perhaps a lot of families would want to see more. Also, I think that we need to explore how is this going to work in terms of if a case is detected of some sort of abuse, what's the process by which that's managed? What's the process by which that's escalated? Because particularly, I mean, as the Minister's alluded to, the state government's only responsible now predominantly for 45 country aged care facilities. We're also now dealing with aged care, particularly in Adelaide, for a whole range of NGO and private providers. So we need to have think through what are the implications for them, and how can we make sure that if issues are identified, that they're going to be followed up. How are family members going to be told about them? How long are things going to be kept for, and how long is a reasonable time to keep tapes for? All of those issues, I think, should be explored in this trial, and we should debate them before we move to the next stage.
All right, and I take it, it goes without saying, Frank, that you support the pilot?
I do.
Yeah.
And look, I would like to commend the government, Stephen Wade, and the Premier for what they announced today. This is a watershed moment in aged care in this country. I've been reading numerous reports that have been, and reviews that have been done over recent years, and they all come to the same finding, that the standard of care and the compliance is wanting in our aged care facilities. It's quite disturbing, and I was reading one submission from the Dementia Australia, and it said, if hell exists, this was it. Hallways echoed with moans, groans, and outcries begging for help. And that really resonated strongly with me, because 23 years ago, and you were working with me at Channel 7,
Yeah.
I conducted one of the first hidden camera investigations into a nursing home.
I know, it was better than doing it on the fridge, man, wasn't it? You remember that? Yeah.
And as Wayne said, it was very difficult. You may remember the quality of hidden cameras
Yes.
we had. But I had residents, the families of residents, and also staff come to me about what was happening in this particular nursing home. The stories I heard were quite disturbing, but of course we had to be able to capture that evidence, and it was very difficult. And it took us several weeks before we were able to compile some damning evidence. And just as we were about to show that story, the proprietor of that place took an injunction against the Seven Network. We then spent the best part of 6 months and close to $300,000 fighting that injunction for the right to show that story that showed abject abuse of residents in their beds, moaning, groaning, calling out for help. And that really has stuck with me for that period of time.
I remember it, Frank.
And that's why I've been determined as a Member of Parliament to ensure that our most vulnerable people in society, people that we actually owe it to ensure that their last years are spent in good care and that there is respect for them. I wanted to ensure that we had that protection for them, and that's what inspired me for my bill. And I thank Nolene Hausler and Stuart. I've sort of dubbed it Clary's Law after Clarence Hausler, but that inspired me to come up with a bill. And it was difficult. It was my first ever bill that I've put up in Parliament, and it was essentially to cover supported residential facilities, and that I thought would have encompassed all facilities, including those
Well, I'll tell you
privately
something very interesting, Frank. I spoke to someone the other day who works in home care, and I found this absolutely fascinating. I raised this with him and I said, could you come along tonight? And he said, no, he's got other things on. But he said, I do want people to know that in home care, he is one of the newer providers, and he's a private, not-for-profit. And he said, I tell every single one of my workers when they walk into someone's home, there's more than likely a camera there. And he said, and you know why? Because there is more than likely a camera there. So the home care people are actually putting in cameras. The ordinary people in their own home. You know, you walk up to someone's house now and there's a camera there, right? Well, they can go and get one of those cameras and they cost very little. They put them up in the bedroom and they say, right, I'm going off to have respite or whatever. I'm going to go for a bit of a holiday. I'm going to leave mum there. There'll be a camera there. So it's actually happening in the home. He said, mention that tonight, that it's here. It's not like, we're not running a pilot in home care. It's already there in home care.
Well, we've got them everywhere. As Stuart pointed out, there are cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, they're on our phones. You'll see that every day. And look, I think it's important, and I think surveys and reviews have shown one of the most important things we can do to ensure the protection of people in aged care is that there is a good collection of data and visual, and so that they could use to do that. But to get back to my bill, I thought it was going to, I wanted it to cover even the private facilities, and unfortunately, and Stephen pointed this out to me, there would have been jurisdictional issues with, and so did Mark, with Commonwealth funding that would have probably made it a bit more complex. So I actually wanted it.
Well, let's go to that now, because Mark, you know, we should remind people that you are a lawyer, aren't you? You were a lawyer. I don't know whether you can you ever not be a lawyer once you've done it.
Well, I handed my ticket in when I got into Parliament, so every care taken, but no responsibility in terms of legal advice.
But you're a very good you have very good knowledge of the law. And can you see this becoming legally possible to be able to, because we are not England, we're not New Zealand, we've got this strange federation of states, you know, so how is it going to work?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible legally, and certainly, you know, I'll take my hat off to Frank. He introduced a bill to get the conversation going, and that's what it's about. At risk of getting furious agreement in the entire panel, Ian,
It'd be a great thing if we did.
when Frank's bill came through, then I go out to the usual suspects and find out what they think. I went to Kota and I went to Jane Mussered and we talked about it, and she said, oh, what about a trial? And now we're doing a trial. And absolutely, I think that's the way to go. It gives us time to do the consultation that's necessary with the residents and the families and the workers and all those. But we can't just have furious agreements. I'm going to try and be a little bit... Yeah, the Greens again. And I've got to say, the Greens can always be counted on to run a civil liberties or a human rights argument. And as Stuart reminded us, cameras are everywhere. Most public places, the shops, the railway station, every taxi, the casino. I sort of get it in casinos if you've got cards up your sleeve and whatever. But I reckon the horse has bolted, largely, in terms of that. In fact, most people in this room have a driver's licence. Your driver's licence was handed over to the federal government 2 years ago for the purpose of facial recognition matching, so that the cameras that see you walking down the street don't just see a person walking down the street, they see you walking down the street. And I think if you ask people maybe 20 or 30 years ago, what do you think about having a camera in mum's bedroom in the home? And they'd, no, you know, privacy, they just wouldn't have a bar of it. I think the horse has bolted. People are much more used to it now. So I don't think there will be that same level of concern. But having said that, there are important issues of privacy and consent, which is why the trial is the way to go.
But can you see that the way that the redaction's available, so therefore it's actually what I'm impressed by is that it does come back to the individual choice or the choice of the family who are acting. If we shouldn't forget that probably more than half the people, according to Dementia Australia, have got some form of cognitive impairment. So someone else is going to be helping make that decision.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a level of protection because, you know, I talk about human rights. Well, you've got your human right not to be watched by Big Brother, but what about the human rights of the people who are being abused and are vulnerable? So that's what we've got to match up. But also what we've heard, I don't want to repeat it all, but what we've heard are the three main functions that I've got from these cameras. You've got preventative.
Yes.
You've also got detection, and especially not just detection of wrongdoing, but detection of incidents. And also one that we haven't talked about much is
Improvement.
vindication.
Vindication and improvement of care too.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So I think it's got a lot going for it. But having said that, it's not open slather and it can't be done in an unregulated way. And so that's why a bill in Parliament's a good way to start, and we need to keep the conversation going.
Now, of course, the group that will actually have to deal with this, I suppose, the largest group is probably the not-for-profits. I know I think the profits are almost taken over the not-for-profits, haven't they, in the race? I'll bring you in on that, but I mean, we know that it's roughly 50-50 depending on which jurisdiction you're in. But let's now hear from Luke Westerberg from representing the not-for-profit provider, AXA, isn't it?
Actually, Aged Care Industry Association, we have private and not-for-profit
You have both.
members.
Okay,
Yeah.
well then that's even better. We can get the whole perspective. So what's the perspective, having seen that presentation, and obviously it's being discussed?
Yep. Well, I think it's an interesting product. There's a range of questions that we've been discussing and in our conversations with government, with providers, with the community, around considerations if we were to have surveillance in residential aged care. Things around the dignity of the person, the right of staff to know if they're being surveilled while they're conducting work, the importance of consent, the importance of data security. Certainly from the presentation, it does seem like many of these issues have been considered. And
So would you like a trial to be done would you offer a trial in the for-profit or not-for-profit sector outside of the state government, so that at the end of the year you could actually have, well, we had a couple of trials. You could run your own trial now, because we've just heard from the government that there's no hindrance now for having a trial. I mean, you can choose to do that yourself, even though you've got Commonwealth funds, surely.
Yes, certainly. Historically, there has been a lack of clarity when providers have sought in feedback from the Commonwealth about whether or not they're in a position to offer surveillance within their facilities. So it was interesting, therefore, to see the Commonwealth working with the state government. I think that has clarified the issue for the industry. I have to note also that the Commonwealth has kicked in $500,000 for the year trial. That's quite a significant amount of funding.
That seems to be a fairly strong signal from the Commonwealth. They wouldn't object to you running a pilot, isn't it, if they have provided
That's
$500,000 for a pilot?
And I'm sure if the Commonwealth were to provide $500,000 for a trial in the non-government sector, they would get some takers.
And would you ask for that?
I don't think there'd be any objection from the industry.
It's a good time to ask for it. They've just announced an election this morning. It's not a bad time to ask for it. Will you ask for it?
Yeah, it's something we'll take up in our conversations with the government.
Well, that's good. All right. Now, I'm conscious of all of the guests that are here tonight that have come along, and I know that many of you have got your own questions. We've been through our panel, so you can have your own questions now. I mean, when you look at that, you look at this here. Why don't we do a show of hands, because we've been sitting quiet for a while. How many people here were convinced by what they've seen tonight that the pilot is a good idea? Okay, there's some hands down. Can we have someone who's got an alternative opinion? Yes.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Alf Macalino. I'm here with my colleague Michael Spencer. We're lawyers from O'Loughlin's Lawyers. We represent probably 80% of the retirement village and aged care operators in this state. I would like to put some contrary views to this. This is a legal minefield, and this, I think, fundamentally, you have to go back to what are we here? The fundamental rights of a resident is for privacy and dignity and their human rights to have autonomy. This is reflected in many, many pieces of legislation. The Guardianship and Administration Act, all these sorts of acts. It is the autonomy of the person. So that's the first thing we have to look at. If you go and implement CCTV in things, there are many acts and pieces of legislation, it's a mishmash. The Surveillance Devices Act of 2016 makes it an offence to, this is just an example, an offence to record a private activity. What could be more a private activity than what goes on in your bedroom? What about the consent? I heard Mr.
Can I just stop you there? Because if we've just heard, as I said, from the home care provider, that he tells every single worker that walks into a home care situation that they are more than likely being filmed. So what's going on if someone does it in their own home from a legal point of view?
In their own home, anyone can give a consent. However, it's this. The consent...
No, not a consent. No, I'm just asking you, should I go back and tell that home care provider that all those people that have got those cameras in those homes are breaking some sort of law?
Oh, well, if they are, they are. But
Well, no, but I'm just asking you, are they breaking law?
Well, the Surveillance Devices Act makes it very clear what you can...
In your own home?
Yes, to record private conversations, you have to comply with the law. You can't just go and record
What happens
private...
what if they put a sign at the front saying this house is under video surveillance?
I'm not giving legal advice here.
Oh, sorry.
With the greatest respect. I'm just making some comments,
and
if you could let me finish, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Yeah.
So we've got that. We've got the privacy laws of this country, a mishmash of laws. You have to get the consent. I heard Mr. Sterling say that his opinion from his lawyers is that you only have to get the consent of the resident. Well, you know, who else goes into the room? There's the employee. They have to consent to having their personal information, and personal information is very widely defined in the Privacy Act. There's a contractor to the aged care facility, a contractor. My mother's in helping hand up at North Adelaide. I had to get someone to go and fix the fridge in her room. That person has to give consent. My grandchildren, when they go and visit their great-grandmother, how are they going to consent to being videoed? This is a minefield. Do not underestimate what this is going to do. If the government has a concerted approach to all of this, I think that I can only ask that people slow down, think about it very carefully, because I've heard tonight only one point of view. I'm putting the opposite point of view. You know, we saw Frank's Bungallow's bill. The supported residential...
Do you mean the bill that he got at Channel 7 or the bill that he had there?
No, the bill before the Parliament. I mean, it applies to only, you know, supported residential facilities. I mean, it's of no consequence. When we start doing this, are we then going to start saying, should we have CCTV cameras in supported disability housing, for example?
Or in airports, for example?
Well, no. We are talking about people's private bedrooms. The people in this room, I'm here. Is there anyone here that's a resident of an aged care facility?
Someone working in an aged care facility?
No. I've asked the question.
Resident. Oh, okay.
The question I ask is anyone here that is a resident of an aged care facility? No. They are the people you should go and ask. How can you give consent on behalf of someone who's at an aged care facility has dementia? The position is that the guardians and the powers of attorney don't have that.
Perhaps I could stop you there, because is there anyone here who knows about the laws of consent in relation to consenting for someone who's in an aged care facility? Well,
yeah, because I have a friend of mine who's in there, and quite simply, if a person who's in an aged care facility is cognisant and is able to make that decision, they're able to make that decision. Otherwise, there's a family member who can do it as a power of attorney. Now, I've had a constituent that has come to see me who placed a camera in his loved one's nursing home, in the bedroom, and the owner ordered them to remove that camera. Now, he had legal advice from a major law firm here in Adelaide that said there was no issue with it. There's also other legal advice, and we've seen here from DLA Piper that there isn't an issue with it. Ian, as you know, as journalists, we had significant interests in the Listening Surveillance Devices Act, and I can say to Mr Macalino that there is one aspect of that act that is still there that enables people to be able to use hidden cameras, and that is that if it's deemed that it's in the person's interest to have that camera, they're able to use it. So that overrides it.
all right, can I just ask our guest from Belfast about the legal minefield?
Certainly, Luke.
Can you just, yeah, thank you very much.
There's going to be differences of opinion from the law firm that we're working with.
Can you come to the microphone a little bit closer, sorry?
From the law firm that we're working with, DLA Piper, as I showed you, we haven't encountered that issue. We've been told that if there's consent given by a resident or a next of kin, that camera can be switched on. In the UK at the moment, if a resident does not want that camera switched on, we make them sign a do not consent form to having that camera off, because we've had examples in the UK where we've had a camera off in a room due to being requested, and an incident's taken place, and the families have come to us and said, why is there no footage from the camera? And it's because that camera hasn't been switched on because there's no consent given. It's the same in Australia from what we find. If consent's given, that camera can be switched on. In public places, I mean, we've probably walked into this university tonight and everybody's been communally recorded on a CCTV camera, and no one's given permission.
There is a fundamental difference between a CCTV camera in a
Look, I
public
understand
place
that.
and a CCTV camera in someone's bedroom. Can I just say there are two areas, and these are grey areas. There is a grey area of consent by people who walk into that room who are not the resident, and there's a grey area as to who can give consent. The law is not clear at all that an attorney or a guardian can give the consent. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying if we're going to have the conversation, let's have a two-sided conversation.
Understood, yeah.
Can I just come to Peter Vincent now? Peter?
I take your point, and I agree that moving into this area is going to be a minefield in a range of different areas, notwithstanding the legal side. But it's interesting that the new combined standards that aged care is about to embark on the 1st of July will actually make it an offence for an aged care provider to refuse a client, a resident, who of their own free will comes to me as a provider and says, Mum wants a camera in her room and we want it monitored. I will actually be in breach of the new combined standards if I don't comply with that.
All I can say is that there is quite a bit of debate within our firm as to the extent with which that section of the Quality and Safeguard about the rights of a representative. I mean, that's what I'm just trying to say. This is not clear law, and you are putting a very significant impost on a very fundamental human right. Can I just finish, because I know there's other people that want to stay. I just want to quote one. Just grab that for a tick.
Well, as long as you're not charging by the minute, we'll be okay. Yeah.
We're here because we're interested. We're here because we are very much part of the sector.
Yeah.
No one can ever dispute that we want the best care for our residents. As I said, my mother is in aged care, my mother-in-law's in aged care, and my stepfather-in-law's in aged care. At 3 separate homes, they're getting great care, so well done to all of those. I just want to quote you from a December 2018 decision of the Supreme Court of South Australia. This was a case about whether a person with impaired decision-making capacity could be detained. The judge said, there are fundamental assumptions deeply embedded in the foundational structure and rules of the common law that recognise that certain rights and freedoms are not to be infringed except by clear lawful authority. Some of the most important fundamental rights are the rights to enjoy personal liberty, freedom of movement and privacy, at least in the sense of freedom from invasive searches. And I think that...
Freedom of invasive searches.
From invasive searches. That's the quotation from Justice Stanley of the Supreme Court. I think when we discuss this and when you go home and you think about these matters, remember what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with fundamental rights of autonomy, privacy, deeply embedded in our common law that stretches back centuries. Do not rush into something without giving the proper consideration to the ramifications of this, for not only this, but also for other areas outside of aged care in the long run. That's all I ask. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And you're engaged by most of the private providers? 80% of the providers. Okay. Well, that's interesting, and they've asked you to provide an opinion for them. Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. And now Stuart, because you're the person who has, as you've said, seen this as being a great opportunity to improve quality care. Let's hear about that.
I think also it's a great opportunity, and I thank the previous speaker. It's a great opportunity to open the conversation. I think the old adage that laws and regulations that have been in place to protect the dignity of the person and their privacy, certainly have been there for a reason and are there for a reason. But we're talking in now with hindsight that we now have a nation that is absolutely on its knees in a crisis in the caring for our vulnerable, our disabled, our children. Now, I encourage whatever laws are there absolutely have to be worked through. But for God's sake, they also need to be changed in order to facilitate these fundamental technological changes that are available and the ability to absolutely look after the rights of the individual, because the rights of the individual start first, foremost, and should end with the right not to be abused, the right not to be thumped, and the right to have a safe environment. I don't think you would find any contractor, visitor, family member walking into an aged care home who have had the full understanding of a situation where Care Protect or another safeguarding system is in place and have an issue with the fact that they could be recorded.
Thank you, Stuart.
I think they'd love it.
Mark, you want to answer?
Just the beauty of the iPad, you can look up the legislation. It is, I'll accept the point that you're making that consent isn't defined.
You accept my honourable...
Yeah, my honourable friend. Consent is an issue, obviously, if you've got someone who doesn't have their own capacity, to what extent can a representative consent for them? But quickly looking through the legislation, the exemptions to the prohibition against filming and audio recording and whatever is usually in two parts. One of the exceptions is, does everyone consent? And if you've sorted that out, yes. But there's this other provision written right through the Surveillance Devices Act. The use of the device is reasonably necessary for the protection of the lawful interests of that person. And that's an alternative to consent. So even if you haven't got consent, if you've got the best interest, the law, if it's necessary for the protection of the lawful interests of the person, it can be used. But having said that, the context, I remember when this bill came up into Parliament and we debated it, and there was a lot of talk about, prurient sexual videos and things like that. I think Parliament probably does need to go back and look at it again and needs to go back and revisit consent and maybe expand what consent means. And, if a person doesn't have their own capacity, who can consent for them? So let's agree to disagree in some ways, but certainly there's possibly more law reform needed. But even without law reform, the advice, and I understand that the government's taken its own legal advice as well, the advice is that the present law does not stop a trial.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, I'd like to bring Eddie Jackson in now. Eddie is with MedTech Supplies and has been involved in a research project with Minda Home looking at CCTV. And as I think someone may have mentioned, Eddie, there, someone may have mentioned if they saw the 7:30 report last night, there was a disturbing number of people who have been highlighted as abusing people with disabilities. It was an extraordinary thing. I think in 6 months there were more than 1,000 people that had been abused, and that's without having cameras watching them. Yeah.
So, just to start off, I suppose that we had 2 trials in disability. That was started in 2016. The previous government was involved with Disability SA, and that was, I think it was 6 units out at Lightsview. And Minda Incorporated, as you mentioned, they had a new facility in their Brighton complex. I suppose I should say that I sold that company in mid-2016 to a public organisation, and so I can't talk about the whole project and its findings.
But you had a surveillance system that was set up to assist people in Minda.
No, that's correct. But you can imagine, and we've talked about it tonight anyway, but you can imagine the committees and so forth that were formed and we had to go through. That was a 6-month process before we could install any technology. And the outcome of that was that we couldn't use CCTV. The unions, the staff, and so forth wouldn't accept it. So we pixelated the view. So we did put CCTV cameras in to the rooms. They were a little dome, a bit like a smoke detector that sat on top of the ceiling, but the view was pixelated, so you couldn't see the resident's face and so forth. But it was a trial, as I said, that was successful.
It was or wasn't successful?
No, it was. But But as I said, I left in probably 2017.
When you say it was successful, did it improve the quality of care? What happened?
So Kathy Miller was the CEO at the time. Kathy's since left Minda, but she did her own independent findings of the system that we installed, and she was very happy with the outcome, both from a staff point of view and the resident. But as I mentioned, we couldn't record CCTV, so that was a no, even though the technology was there to do it.
So how did you use it if you couldn't record it and you couldn't see everything was pixelated?
Yeah, so we used it for a number of ways. It had voice in it, so we could detect the resident's voice, and if the voice was aggravated or there was something like help yelled out, that set off an alarm. So it was an alarm-based system, basically.
Right.
Falls and so forth, we did that. But it is still new technology. There are a number of players in the market. It looks like Care Protective, at least, the UK and Europe have always been a number of years ahead of us. And I'm sure their system works. In Australia, there are a number of companies that are putting a lot of money and effort into this area, but it's still early technology.
All right. Well, is Trevor Westhead here and Anthony Sid, are they here as well? Yeah. Would you like to comment on that? Because you're involved in this area, I understand as well, Trevor.
Thank you. Where I come from the health industry, Access Communications actually is a Swedish company. And from its beginnings, it's always had quite a learned experience within the healthcare industry, hence the production of thermal. And thermal imagery is a good thing to hear about. Predominantly, actually, it is in the rooms over in the UK being used right now. Not only in the toilet area, because it's thermal, but also in the main area. So there's no visualness going other than the heat. But what we are seeing is we're using cross-line detection, which means the person who may be moving off the bed, the moment it crosses the line, before the fall, there's a predictiveness going on. So there's no facial recognition. The other side that we use is also sound intelligence, built on top of the camera algorithm. And what this does, and you've alluded to that, was the fact that there is a yell or an aggression, particularly when there was a yelling going on, it was picked up immediately. You are not recording the voice. You're hearing a cochlear implant style of recording. And that's all you hear is like an aggression
Can I
sound.
ask you, are they doing all this sort of heat shimmering and cochlear implant audio to get around the laws that you were talking about?
Very big privacy issue. So therefore, the actual visual in some premises in the UK and the US is actually not allowed to have proper visual cameras. It has to be.
What about
all
in Sweden,
thermal.
where the technology was invented?
Sorry?
What about in Sweden, where you said the technology was invented?
Absolutely.
What, they use it or they don't use it?
They do use it there as well.
They use the heat shimmer and the cochlear implant noise?
Yes. So Sound Intelligence is a Swedish company as well as Access, and together they produce that algorithm to work on the edge of the camera. So there's no server required either, so actually the camera does all the work. But there's a lot, and I agree here from a legal perspective, I'm certainly not in the legal fraternity at all, but I do listen and understand on a global perspective that every region and country is different. But the pain is the same. And when we look at that pain, my father is actually in our aged care at the moment in Mildura, and my mother died of dementia just not that long ago. And she was being physically abused, and we were not allowed to put a camera in there. And I'm on the same. But if we can get past the privacy issue and get into the area of saying what is the predominant issue here, it's the safety of our parent or child, then I have no problem with allowing in our families to allow a camera to go in where Dad is now, and we are getting one installed. But it's all thermal. And I know how it actually operates, so I can get past that area of being able to present it in such a fashion where Dad's privacy is upheld.
It's very interesting what you've told us. So you can have your camera and still use it, you know.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I do agree here, just quickly to finish on my point, is if there is a video motion detection being used, so no continuous recording, and there's a trigger point where motion is then detected, then turn on. That's an extremely very good algorithm to be able to use as well. And masking and pixelation is also used in a very big way.
One of the things
globally.
I'd like to just come back to is back to the presentation we had from Care Protect, because I found the figure quite extraordinary when you think about the $20 per week to provide the service. Just before you go, I'd just like to ask you, is that a similar figure, the $20 per week per room for the, is that sort of like an industry ballpark figure?
Well, I must say, actually hearing that price is it's actually quite good.
It is,
it's exceptional.
Yeah,
and
well,
Sid, you may agree. Okay, it's an exceptional price.
Well, it comes down to less than $3 a day.
Wow.
And when we look at what we spend on aged care, the total aged care bill in Australia has clicked over the $20 billion mark. That's not in residential, that's the total bill, but I mean, it seems a fairly small amount of money. I don't know whether people are nodding their heads. It doesn't sound much. Can we just go back to Care Protect, please? I'm sorry, and just say, is it because you've got so many homes using it? I mean...
It's not, I mean...
Could you come to the mic again? Sorry.
Yeah. Look, the $20 per week has been built into our business model over here. Usually we
Can you
sign
come a bit closer to the mic, thanks?
I'm not close. Usually we sign a 3-year contract with our clients. I understand the need for a pilot system to prove that the technology actually works in Australia. But I mean, our costs are only covered after, say, 18 months. We operate a leasing model that allows us to pay for the installation up front and have no cost to the provider, because we know in the UK sometimes that cash can be hard to come by.
How big is it? I mean, just because we're trying to get an idea of it. How many places in the UK, percentage-wise, how many aged care homes would be using a system like yours? Are we talking 5% or what?
Yeah, we look after around 2,500 beds at the moment. We have another 300 coming on.
But what about when you talk about access, you've got these others? How common is it overseas?
To have CCTV?
Yeah.
It is becoming more and more common. I mean, there's always grey areas around legal side of things over there too, but it is becoming more and more common, especially in communal areas, and people are now taking the approach to ask for one in their bedroom. Staff are becoming very comfortable with it. When we initially said that we were installing the system in our own homes, our staff were very unhappy. Our homes are unionised. And you know, some of them were very unhappy. They were ready to walk. Within about 6 weeks of the system actually going in, 2 staff members were vindicated of an event that took place. It was a malfunction with a bed hoist, and it was a malfunction with the equipment itself. We were able to review that footage, bring the families in to our homes, show them exactly what had happened and what we'd done to fix that issue. And those 2 staff members are still with us to this day. And they have actually changed their opinions now to say we wouldn't work anywhere without CCTV.
Thank you very much. Now, more questions from the audience. We've got a question up the back. If there's someone that works in aged care as well, I'd love to hear their perspective. And if they don't, I'll end up going to my brother who did work in aged care. So.
Thank you. My name's Colin. I have my mother has advanced dementia. She's in an aged care facility in Harndorf. But the previous gentleman was talking about thermal imaging technology and was considering, am I correct in saying, considering installing that in your father's? Yeah. So if that's the case, I just wanted to understand how thermal imaging would capture aggressive episodes towards one of your loved ones. And the second part of the question is perhaps directed to Minister Wade. Is it currently available for people like myself to use or to put forward as an idea in non-government run aged care facilities in this state?
Yeah, perhaps answer the thermal, yes, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Just how would it work?
Great question. Regarding the thermal, it's mainly there to use with the embedded sound intelligence application. So it's actually all about the physical voice. The visual camera, which is in the normal hallways of the aged care facility, so it's outside Dad's room, that will capture the face of the person going into the room and coming out. So there is no problem as far as knowing who entered that room, one caregiver or two caregivers. But if that person is screaming and yelling and there's two caregivers that have gone in and gone out, then both of them will have to be interviewed and they can explain who was the perpetrator. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much. And then the question to Minister Wade. Yeah.
Yeah, I might answer that with a few pieces of information. First of all, there are already 2 SA Health facilities that have CCTV in common areas. No facilities currently have them in bedrooms. My understanding, Luke might be able to give us more information here, but I also understand there are some private operators that are using CCTV in private areas. Nolan might be better informed about, if you like, individual arrangements. My understanding is that there are a number of operators that do allow CCTV cameras, families to install CCTV cameras with consent. As Mark was saying, that addresses the surveillance devices issues. I think there was a case recently where an operator had agreed to install and then was withdrawing consent. So it's an illustration of being done on a case-by-case basis. But what the pilot is looking at is making it available within a particular facility. So as Mr. Sterling highlighted, you'd install cameras in every room, but only activate it with the consent of the resident.
Will you be using a baseline study? In other words, you'll say, let's go back, look over the last 12 months, and then we'll look over the next 12 months while the pilot's in there and see whether there's, greater life expectancy of patients, etc. Will it be done in a sort of scientific manner?
Well, certainly we're setting up a steering committee to oversee the project.
I think you've got Stuart on that steering committee, haven't you?
Stuart will be on it, and a range of consumers, stakeholders and government reps. The committee will assess the success of the pilot, and that of course involves doing baselines and seeing what success looks like. And it was raised with the media, in the media this afternoon. Why don't we wait till the Royal Commission's finished and then do this? I actually don't agree with that. I think the issue has already been raised in the Royal Commission. It's an opportunity, if you like, to do some action research alongside the Royal Commission.
And I'll just get a plug in too. As I mentioned before, the Royal Commission, when they closed their proceedings here in Adelaide, are going to Sydney. They'll be looking at dementia. They'll be looking at particularly at how to improve aged care quality and safety in dementia. And I would urge anyone who is in this room who's got an experience that they want to put in, then do that, because as of June, they won't be taking any more submissions. So, Minister, maybe you'll put something in about the pilot, or people that are talking here, the gentleman up the back who's got his own concerns, the lawyers who have got their concerns. I mean, you can all put a submission into the Royal Commission. And it's important that we do, because it won't come round again.
And I think we need to be realistic. There'll be lots of ideas that come up through the Royal Commission. There's an active discussion going on about whether or not staff ratio should be mandated. That will not be cheap. The installation of CCTV won't be cheap. It may well come down to a series of options where the Commonwealth is going to say we're going to mandate this and we're not going to mandate that. This pilot will at least give them preliminary data, if not final data, that can help saying what is the best way to protect and provide quality care to older Australians.
But I will remind you that it's fascinating to go and see the Royal Commission in action, because Ms Buffington from the department was on the stand the other day, and she was asked to address the issue of home care wait lists, and she said, it'll cost 820-something million. I'm being recorded here, but I can't remember the exact figure. It was in the 800 million. And then the council quite pointedly said, is that to fix the whole problem? And does that give every single person on that wait list a package in time, the one they need? And then she said, no, it's 2 to 2.5 billion. So the answer came back and it was 3 times the size. But they are asking, what will it cost? How do we fix the problem? So I go back to you again, as people that have come out of your homes tonight to actually look at trying to improve the system. It's beholden on us to put in submissions and actually make sure. Jane, you've got your hand up from CODA? Yeah.
I was really pleased today to hear that the federal government put in
Well, I found it curious that I found it interesting that in the UK, correct me if I'm wrong, but Scott, I think you actually, it's the provider of the home that pays, not the resident. Isn't that right?
Yeah, the provider, we charge the bill goes to the provider of the home, yes. I mean, we would never tell any facility how to actually run their business model, but we have found in the UK that a lot of family members from facilities would actually pay the fee if they were asked, but we bill directly to the facility.
So the facility pays it, so it's not a question of you missing out. So I suppose it is possible that if this was seen as a way of doing it, then it would be one of the aged care quality standards that would be asked of an aged care quality provider.
And I suppose what this trial allows is for that to be
Tested.
tested. Who should pay for that, and will that cost be passed on to residents? And if it is passed on to residents, does that become a barrier? If somebody consents and wants this, does that become a barrier? And I think it is the great advantage of having a trial and a funded trial for providers.
Right, and we've got
Sid Anthony. Yeah.
Sid, yeah,
From Bosch Security
Sid Anthony
Systems,
from
yeah.
Bosch Securities. Yep.
Yeah. No, I had a quick question first relating to audio. Now, obviously, the Surveillance Act doesn't allow for audio. We've been talking about video. How in Australia at the moment, have you been going around the challenges of recording audio?
Well, we haven't. Today is the first time that we've actually developed a client relationship, so that is something that we'll have to work on as well, with sites and with our lawyer. But at the moment, we haven't actually encountered a situation whether we can turn on the audio on our cameras, because we've got no client relationships currently until today.
Sure. No, I just wanted to also share a little bit about what we're doing.
Please.
So, Bosch is a global company. Everyone knows it from the automotive business, but we're working with now advanced video analytics that have actually come from our automotive business, and we now plug it into our cameras. So all that hard, heavy lifting work is done by the cameras, a bit like our friends here at Axis. And so we're currently working on a couple of trials at the moment with a couple of aged care facilities. And we're looking at more at using the video analytics as video as a sensor. So we're looking at, whether the patient's actually the resident has fallen out of the bed, if they've gone off to the ensuite, have they come back, how many people are actually in the room at the time, this kind of technology. And it's not just from alert and alarm status, but also to be able to produce this as statistics, what's actually going on in that room or what's going on in the field. So we're doing this right across all sorts of, industries and markets, and this is one we're working on currently at the moment.
Well, technology, as they say, is a great way of improving things for good or ill. You've got your hand up there, just a bit at the back there.
Yes, my name's Lambro. I'm from St Basil's Homes, and we actually have signed up with Scott today, and we actually did receive advice from Alf as well. So we sit in the middle, where we both agree with Scott and we do agree with Alf, and we will absolutely work through the issues with Alf to ensure that we do ensure that our residents have everything.
Are you thinking of putting the cameras in St Basil's?
One of our homes, yes, in one of our homes.
Oh, that's that. So then you'll have a government trial and a not-for-profit trial if you ran yours as a trial.
Yes, yeah. Well, we're looking at doing it for a year trial, though we signed up with Scott before the announcement. So, for us, look, the Royal Commission has taught us one thing, and it's taught us that we need to be absolutely brave. Okay, we are here for our resis. We're working in the aged care environment. It's a big family, and I can say that as being the CFO of the aged care provider, being a CFO in commercial world, before the not-for-profit world, it was all focused on the bottom line. As for here, it's all about our residents, their well-being, and just seeing that smile on their faces at the end of the day. I think about that when I think about my mum and my father, who's passed away, and I absolutely think, what would it be like if my parents were in aged care, and how should they be treated? Now, CCTV allows us the ability so that we can ensure, that a resident is always they're getting the absolute utmost care in the best possible way that they can. The reports that Scott provides don't just simply say the bad things that happen, they also say the good things too. So it's a traffic light report that focuses on the positives and the negatives. So from our perspective, to ensure that our residents have the safety and ultimately live their lives to the best that they can, we need to be brave to work through these issues in an extremely informed way to ensure that our facilities, our staff and our resis are ultimately happy.
And one question we didn't get answered for Scott, and I'd like to ask you that.
Sure.
Do you think that the family members will like the app? You know, he said it's not being used in the UK.
Yeah,
What do
well,
you
we've
think?
actually spoken to a lot of our families about this already, and they are absolutely on board. They are absolutely on board, and our residents too. So not just because we understand that, the recent
So we're
surveys.
sort of Skyping each other, will they? And that's the
Yes, yeah. Well, we've introduced that into some of our facilities, and they've taken on to that. And we're a Greek aged care provider, and my mother, she seems to think that technology is evil, but she's taken it on board because she can now see her brothers and sisters in Greece. So it just provides comfort. A lot of the families that we see in our facilities, they come in because they trust us. They trust us with their loved ones, and they want to see that their families are safe. So this is just another layer of safety for these families, and absolutely agree that we just need to work through the government, through the legislation to make it be that way. So yeah, that's.
Well, look, we started 10 minutes late. We're going to finish 2 minutes late. Yeah. And you've got to get a train to catch. But look, I do want to just say that it's been wonderful that you've all shared your time tonight, and it shows there is a real commitment. And I think it's wonderful that it's the new word that I've learned for tonight from Mark, multi-partisan. There's a multi-partisan commitment, and I think everyone here has enjoyed the night. And I thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you. And Peter, this will be somewhere on the cloud, will it? Yeah.